This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jimmy Bogner. This is podcast episode 225, and we are incredibly excited to be coming to you from the barrel cellar in Belgium of Fonteinen, a fantastic lambic and Gueuze brewery here in Belgium on the outskirts of Brussels, right near the Seine River. Joining me on the podcast, co-hosting, is Joe Stang, our managing editor. And Werner and Lukas have joined us from the brewery. We're going to talk about their approach to lambic brewing. Welcome, of course.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah. We are going to talk about their approach to lambic brewing. We're going to talk particularly about their approach to ingredients. There is that romantic blended element of spontaneous fermentation. We've talked about that quite a bit on the podcast with all sorts of brewers over many, many years. The brewery here has a particular approach to cereal and grain, and we are going to talk about how they are closing the gap in agriculture, trying to create a more holistic approach and a more integrated approach across all of those things, which is such an interesting thing for somebody because the focus of lambic is so built around the romantic notion of spontaneous fermentation. The ingredient side of that beer is often not paid as much attention to. We are going to talk all about that. Of course, in the past, in 2018, Fonteinen's Armand Cuvée Armand Gaston, which we're drinking right now, was one of our beers of the year. And we are also going to taste a few of their other projects in the works because they're doing fantastic work in everything from sherry barrels and using creating lambic and aging lambic in a variety of ways to create compelling blends that explore all sorts of flavors as well as natural winemaking processes. We're going to do all of that, but first, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. This episode is also brought to you by our friends at BSG. We all know that the best brewing results come from the best ingredients. BSG offers the largest variety of quality ingredients to create outstanding beers. BSG brings the best malt, hops, and additives from around the world to your brew house. Their knowledgeable and dedicated staff comes from the brewing industry and can assist you in product consultation for your recipe formulation. Contact your dedicated sales or customer service rep or become a customer at bsgcraft.com/be a customer. Werner, why don't we kick off the podcast with, if you can give us a bit of history about both the brewery and then also about your particular journey in beer that has brought you here.
Okay, Brouwerij Fonteinen actually started as a cafe in the village center of Beersel, which is a stone throw away from Lot. Actually, the end of the 1800s. It has gone through 5 different generations. Meanwhile. The last, let's say, 20 years, Armand has actually built Fonteinen from a one-man blendery to actually a team of 20 today, where we have evolved from purely blending to brewing and blending. So about 75% of the lambic that you see around us is actually brewed by Fonteinen. And the 25% other percent we still buy wort from befriended breweries, and we elevate it to lambic in our own barrels. The last
elevate. You take the wort and you elevate it.
We elevate it. It's taken from the French word élevage, coming from wine. The process of lambic brewing and the whole fermentation, maturation, and aging in a bottle is actually closer to winemaking than actually other types of beer making. And it bears a very historical approach to beer brewing. And that makes, I think, lambic still very special in today's beer world. That's the last couple of years we have been, or that at least was the very first step in the modern history of Drie Fonteinen. So just to give you an overview of what happened the last couple of years, in 2013, Drie Fonteinen was spread out on 4 different locations. So we had the brewery in Beersel itself, we had a small barrel room under the brewery, we had a barrel room 2 streets from the brewery, and then 2 other barrel rooms, also with bottling equipment and labeling equipment in Halle, which is, let's say, a 15-minute drive on normal hours. But of course, brewers, they don't work on normal hours. They work in the morning, they work in the evening, and that's actually the rush hour around Brussels. So a normal 15-minute drive actually took about 45 minutes on average. At that time, there were working 4 people at Drie Fonteinen. About 1 full-time employee was actually doing the logistics between the different locations. So at that time, Armand and Michaël already joined Drie Fonteinen at that time. We were thinking about getting everything together to work more efficiently, to have more options in terms of operations and so on. And that's actually how I rolled in 10 years before. I made my thesis on traditional lambic beers. And of all brewers, Armand was actually the only one that was very open, very outspoken on what he did. Also on the financial data, because my thesis was financially inspired, and went about how passion and financial ratio were not always aligned to each other. Ever since, and that's what Armand has always been to me, like a kind of a very a kind of a mentor. And at the age of 22, doing that thesis, having his question, or he asked me, like, look, once it's finished, I also want to know from you what I'm doing well, what I'm doing wrong. I would like you to give me some perspective. So after the thesis, Drie Fonteinen has always been the brewery that inspired me to think about values, to think about quality. And every month I went to Drie Fonteinen to fetch my case of Gueuzes to put away in my cellar. And then in the summer of 2013, I came into the shop in Beersel, and suddenly Armand sees me, and very abundantly he invites me to the back where there was a table, like these 2 tables that we're sitting at, full of plans about a possible location to actually go to. I knew Armand for years. I already knew Michaël from the brewing course. Michaël not having a brewery background. A lot of people don't have a brewery background working at Drie Fonteinen, which is actually a trait rather than it's actually a trait.
It's a feature. It's not a flaw.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the only thing I could ask Armand is, like, do you already have a plan? Like a financial plan or a business plan? Armand didn't want to hear about it at that point, and it was out of sheer interest that I asked the question. But I proposed, like, look, Armand, once it's getting more real and concrete, just call me, because this is such a beautiful project. I really would like to continue to drink Drie Fonteinen, to cellar it, so that my children and maybe even my grandchildren can still drink Drie Fonteinen, because Drie Fonteinen was still in 2013 in kind of a bad shape after the thermostat incident in 2009. And suddenly in October 2013, so a few months later, he calls me and says, Werner, I think we should talk, because things are getting real. And that's how I entered in Drie Fonteinen. First, I worked for a year and a half, like, working on the plan. The initial location was not the final location. We looked for more than a year, 2 different possible options before choosing this one here. And in the meanwhile, I helped out a bit on just bookkeeping, all the overhead stuff, so that Armand and Michaël could really focus on the creative and the artistic side, so to say. And when you end up choosing a location, when you speak to the banks, then the question pops up, and Armand asked it, and that's the beauty about Armand as being our pater familias, our guide, our inspiration. As from the first meeting, he always asked, Werner, what's your ambition? And those are the moments that I'm getting quiet. It's maybe he already had a plan in his head about the future that he foresee for the Fonteinen. And that's how I actually tumbled into the Fonteinen. And I'm very grateful ever since that I got that opportunity.
For someone who comes from a business background, and with that, in schooling and university, you also have a very firmly held philosophy about creating a holistic approach to this that is very much in line with the vision of the creative side of the business, and very much about supporting that creative vision and creating that entire sustainable economy around creating this artisanal product. I can't wait to talk a little bit more about that. But first, supply chain challenges are here to stay for a while. So why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard is partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more of concentrate from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes from various carriers and can stay up to date on the status of your shipment. To get started on a freight quote for craft concentrates today, head over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, Brew Monitor from Precision Fermentation is the first real-time comprehensive fermentation monitoring solution. It works with your existing fermentation tanks to track dissolved oxygen, pH, gravity, pressure, temperature, and conductivity in real time from any smartphone, tablet, or PC. Brew Monitor provides detailed insight into your fermentations that helps improve beer consistency, reduce tank time, and increase overall efficiency, saving your brewery time and money. Get started for 30 days risk-free. Visit precisionfermentation.com/brewing. Let's talk about that then. Coming at this, because lambic and Gueuze is so tied to historical tradition, but also, again, romantic notions of brewing in a beautiful way and in a connected way. You have come into this in order to enable that, and also build a firm business foundation for that, to allow it to happen on that kind of creative level. Talk to me about some of the ways that you and Drie Fonteinen are making those kinds of connected approaches to building this holistic approach in brewing.
It's an interesting question. It's not a short answer. And maybe going back to those first days of thinking ahead and thinking about the future, there's always one thing. There's a very big layer of gut feeling. And the gut feeling is just the energy you get from people sitting around the table. And in the beginning, that was Michaël, Armand, and myself.
And Michaël is the next generation blender.
Yep.
Armand.
Absolutely, yeah. So in 2010, Armand was looking for some extra hands in the brewery, in the blending operations. And Michaël just walked up, and immediately they were thinking, this is him.
Sure.
And
this kind of generational thing is something that even American craft brewers are now facing. That American craft brewers that started in the 80s and 90s, you have a generation of brewers who are at retirement age, and how do you continue? You either need to find someone to pass it on to, and the same thing has happened here. If you don't have a next generation within your own family that's interested in taking over that business, but it's a business that is driven by passion, that you have to have a passion for, then you need to find someone to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Michaël was trained as being an accountant, but those traits, being very structured, are also very helpful in brewing, because you have to follow some different steps, and you have to keep your head on the whole process. Armand, not having children of his own, was looking for the next generation and for some follow-up. That's why he referred a lot to Michaël and myself as being the sons he never had. That also indicates how Armand was so open to allow other people into his business, from the notion that he want Drie Fonteinen to survive beyond himself. And then you sit around the table and you start to draft the future. And I will give you one anecdote to answer to that question. The most difficult part of planning the future for a lambic brewery or a blendery, it's the complexity of having a balance within the barrel room. You need to have 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and in the case of Drie Fonteinen, we have barrels of 3, 4, 5, and 6 years. You need to plan that ahead if you want to buy new barrels, and you have to also start to model the financial side of it, to go to a bank for a loan, and so on. That was up to Michaël and myself to do. So,
right, you are spending a lot of money to make beer that you won't sell for several years. You also then need to predict demand several years out so that you are making the right amount of beer 3 years from now. And then, of course, you can't plan for something like a global pandemic that happens in the midst of all of that.
Absolutely. So there's we don't have a linear process. So we brew something just to put it away for a very long time. So we brew and we blend with a huge delay. And to come back to while making plans, one of the nicest moments that happened while sitting at the same exact tables that we're sitting at a Sunday morning, because we did it in our free time when Michaël was not brewing, so planning for the future was done in our free time. At a certain point, Armand comes in. We didn't know about it. He was using an excuse. I have to fetch something, which was very short. But he came out. He went out. He looked back to us and he says, "I'm really loving what I'm seeing." And he was gone. And that actually took us like 5 minutes to start to grasp what was happening. And still today, thinking about that moment, we are still very quiet about it, because it was a very beautiful moment, and that's where we actually realized that what we were doing was actually the continuation of the values of Armand, and that's what I mean by the gut feeling. We plan ahead. We joined different experiences and expertise, and then we decide and we go. Between 2013 and 2019, we have been planning towards 2019, so over 6 years, because it took 6 years to come to that balance again. That was aligned with the surface, or the potential of the surface that we have here with this building. So we pre-invested quite some effort in terms of human capital. So we hired an extra brewer, we hired people for the barrel room before actually selling the very first bottle. And then COVID hits. That's that was the most wrong timing, because we actually got to the new kind of balance end of 2019, a few months prior to COVID.
You've built this new, much more expensive facility. You've filled it up with barrels and beer, more fooders, everything else, in order to increase production and hopefully make enough beer to meet more of the demand around for it worldwide, and then COVID hits.
Yeah. So the initial plan has always been to go to 8,000 hectoliters of barrel capacity, to actually produce around 3,500 hectoliters in bottles. So which is more or less a rotation cycle of 2.5 years. So between the brew and the actual usage of the lambic for fruit maceration or to blend it to a Gueuze, every drop in a weighted average approach is 2.5 years before we use it in the barrel room. That's not including the bottle conditioning. So it's a very long process, and it's actually the continuation of the process that Armand has always respected. As Armand always said, with this new environment about Gaston, Gaston can come in and he can just continue because we're actually doing the same thing, only on another scale. And that's what I mean. Growing a business is one thing, but it's also important to keep in mind the values with which you do it. And that has unchanged with Drie Fonteinen.
With this craft malt idea that has been growing in the world of craft beer, that's something that you all have embraced deeply here. I think it goes back to, as we were talking before we started the podcast, that one of Armand's ideas was brewing from the back garden. And you've engaged in something, when we all think about it from an American perspective, when we think about lambic brewing, we think about the romantic idea of fruit and the spontaneous fermentation. But grain in particular is something that you all have focused deeply on. Talk to me about the program that you all have engaged in to more closely connect your lambic beer with the grain that it's made from.
So that takes us back to 2017. Also a nice summer day outside that we were thinking about the very long term for Drie Fonteinen. And while we were buying new barrels and already trying some more fruits, the next question popped up, like, what about the cereals? And that's where Armand put his fist on the table. He says, we have to go back to our own back garden. And between an idea and the actual realization of such an idea.
Armand has the idea, and then it's up to you all to execute on this. I see.
That has been the natural balance between the three of us. That's true. Luckily, we are close to the Pajottenland. It only takes a few phone calls to get in touch with some farmers, and very quickly we came in touch with a boer Thijs, like we say locally, Thijs Boelens, who was actually already multiplying very old varieties of wheat land races, and he actually pointed us to Lukas. Who at that time was doing his thesis around agroecology, but he can explain that way better than I can. From then on, everything happened very, pun intended, spontaneously. When sitting together with farmers, you do not only share the same passion, but you also feel them. You feel their challenges. You feel their values. And the beauty of it all is that we actually are. Everyone says it's quite innovative. It's not. It's actually doing again what was once the standard, and that's the expression of terroir. And when talking about lambic, of course, you're talking about the air, the Seine River, but we're forgetting about the soil, which is also very fruitful and very rich in these regions. And that's it was just pure or sheer logic that we would do it, because it's also an expression of the steadfast direction that Drie Fonteinen is going, not only for the beer, but it's an extension of what we're doing with the beer.
So, Lukas, let's talk about that. I sense a theme here where university thesis turns into brewery project. Talk to me about yours and how that has then expressed and become something from a theoretical idea to a program and practice here.
Yeah. So actually, indeed, it was the farmer, Thijs, who was very enthusiastic and already searching for these old land races, multiplying them. And he knew about the Kleine Rosse van Brabant, the old land race, which was grown here in Pajottenland and used by all the lambic brewers in former times. And so they met somehow. Actually, something on top of that. He is working on a couple of the fields from Armand's family. So he's growing now actually vegetables. He's a small-scale vegetable farmer. And so he knew Armand. And so they discussed together, and Thijs was like, Armand, haven't you got any old bag of wheat somewhere hidden, somewhere lost in the brewery? There might be something we could try to grow and see if this is still alive. But he didn't. And so indeed, like Werner said, the whole reflection of we don't know the farmers anymore. We're very proud of our beer, of our approach, but we have no clue where the cereals come from. And so that's why they asked us, could you help us to find farmers from the region which could grow the cereals together for us? And so Des was like, okay, this is a really interesting project. We could create kind of a cereal collective of farmers. But Des wanted to remain farmer himself, and he didn't want to become kind of a coordinator of a network. And that's why somehow he found me, and he asked me, are you interested in working on this type of project? And I was like, yeah, for sure, this is great, but I'm still studying. I don't have so much time yet. And so I had to finish studies first, and then I had to write a thesis for the studies. And then I was like, why don't we think of can we write a thesis about this? And so we talked to Fonteinen, we talked to Thijs, we talked to the professors, and everybody was quite enthusiastic. And so that was actually the starting point of really thinking, how can we organize this whole thing? How can you organize this network of farmers so that it benefits to all partners? And so it's not only for Fonteinen an interesting project because we have the local grains again and it's a nice story, but how should we organize ourselves so that for the farmers it's really a benefit too? And this is really a big issue. It's not evident. And so the whole thing, one of the big concepts in this thesis was the lock-ins. Which are the lock-ins in this whole system? Why isn't it happening anymore? We are very proud of our Belgian beer, but there's not much Belgian in Belgian beer. Apart from the water.
Right.
There's less than 3% of all the grains needed by the Belgian brewers, which comes from Belgium, which is grown in Belgium. And so we totally lost this connection actually between the processors, the beer makers, and the farmers. And so that's why we were like, okay, how do we set this up? Which quality criteria do we need? Which prices do we need? Which risk sharing do we need? Because some years it's just the weather is bad and the harvest is not good, and so we can't use it. How do we store between production, between the field, the harvest, and brewing? Because brewing is in the winter, harvesting is in the summer. What happens to the grain in between? And so many questions popped up, and we really had to deal with it. But the approach was so nice because it was a really participatory approach between the brewers, the farmers, and the researchers somehow. To think all together. We met a couple of times. We invited all the farmers here to discuss about how will we organize ourselves. We invited the brewers to visit the fields of the farmers, and so the farmers telling about how are they growing these grains, what issues do they meet, how does it work, and so this trust creation between the farmers and brewers, the respect also to understand the work of the other is so important.
So this is a multi-dimensional thing.
Yeah.
First, you need to decide, you look back at a potential library of heritage grains, landrace wheat varieties, barley varieties also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you need to do agricultural test projects to see what grew and what kind, because all of these you're trying to triangulate between flavor and expression, something that's useful for you as a brewer,
yeah,
but also agronomic sustainability, something that can grow efficiently and healthy in a resilient kind of way for the farmers so that they can make enough of it and you can find some way to price it. And so talk to me about how you worked through that piece of it to find both flavorful but also agronomically possible varieties to grow.
Yeah, that's exactly the innovative side of the work we're doing, because we do in research and in making new varieties of wheat or barley or anything. It's really it's got totally out of the hands of the farmers. It's the researchers, it's the Monsantos of
right,
today.
The larger corporate entities that are selling you the seeds,
exactly,
right?
They are
telling
making
you what it is.
and they have all the knowledge of how to make a new variety. And the farmers, they did before, because they were just selecting in the field. They were seeing they did have populations in their field, so things were more diverse. And sometimes they would be like, oh, this one is so beautiful, is so resistant to diseases, I'll pick it. and I'll multiply it, and I'll see if I can grow something new. And so it was something the farmers were very familiar with. But today it's totally lost. And so there's a new approach of participatory plant breeding, which we call. And so this is the way of involving the farmers again in this type of work. But normally it's between breeders, researchers, and farmers. And here we add the brewers in this group. Because we try, as you said, we try to find the right varieties which are adapted to the farmers, to their condition, the terroir, the field, the soil, but also their farming techniques, their practices. And also, in the second time, to the brewery. What do we need? And actually, we have to redefine the criteria, because industry sets criteria. They say, okay, a brewing barley needs to be this and this and this and this. But for us, being an artisanal brewery, a craft brewery, we don't need the same criteria. But nobody else is saying, okay, this is the set of criteria for the craft breweries.
But you must know what criteria you need here. For Drie Fonteinen, there must be specifications, and then or do you improvise? You can work with
you can just change your practice based on what the grain is.
Again, it's all also about the interpretation of what lambic is, and our interpretation is that it should not be a standardized beer. It has never been, and it should never be. It's a natural beer, and nature, you cannot control nature, and it already starts with the cereals. What is then more important, and again, a lot of today's industrial grains are being cultivated for the very specific feature of efficiency in the brewing kettle. How much sugar do you get out of the grain? Because a lot of breweries, they brew for efficiency. Drie Fonteinen, our brewing installation, is as inefficient as can be. Just to give you an idea, and I think the brewers among us will really like or adhere to what I'm going to say. So on a normal brew day, we brew towards between 12 and 13 degrees Plato. That's a bit the density of lambic. But in our spent grains, there's still 6 degrees Plato left when it goes out. So the kettle, or the kettle of the farmer to who we get it to, they're very happy because there's still a lot of nutrition material in the spent grains, but it's absolutely not efficient. And to also answer to your question between the agronomical model and then the flavor impact. Well, actually, we are now working and researching on more than 50 different cereals spread over wheat and barley. But we actually started sometimes from only 5 or 6 grains.
Oh, grams.
Sorry?
5 or 6 grams.
Grams.
100 grains, which is a handful.
It's a handful, and it takes about 5 to 7 years before you have a volume that you can actually brew with. So there's a lot of things that we're doing that we will only know the results of in so many years, and that's a part of the effort. And meanwhile, we are learning with the whole group. The farmers are learning, we are learning, we're doing small tests, and that's the part of the adventure, I think. But we're documenting everything so that at least in a certain time we can learn from it. We can see what we're going to continue or discontinue. Another interesting fact is that a lot of these grains were not found in Belgium, but a lot of Brabant grains were actually found in seed banks in the US.
Interesting.
Yep.
And so you've been able to go to seed banks in other countries that had seeds for native Belgian barley and wheat.
Yeah, indeed. In Belgium, there's no real seed bank. They have a couple of varieties, but in cereals, really not much. And so there are a lot of seed banks all over the world. And so searching everywhere for this one particular variety, we found a couple of Belgian land races or Belgian old varieties in the seed banks of the US, for example, but also closer by in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands. And so the good thing is that these seed banks are kind of open, so everybody can order seed. But as they do not have a huge capacity, they cannot store of every variety a couple of kilos because it takes too much place.
Sure.
They have many varieties. So they send you 5 grams. So
Right.
that's very small. And by hand, together with this, we sew it together on 1 square meter. And then the next year, it's maybe 10, 15 square meters. And we multiply it that way. But for the brewery, it takes a long time. But here at Fonteinen, we're used to taking time.
Sure. And we've had this conversation with other folks like Nick Gislason from Hanabi Lager Company. Same kind of thing, was searching for Bear, a barley variety that was historically from Scottish Island, and found one grower out on the eastern side of Washington State who was just that old fanatical brewer or old grower who just refused to give up this variety even though no one else is growing it, or some like Matt Riggs in Illinois who was looking to make his own or grow his own corn for brewing adjunct American lager with corn, but needed a low oil variety, and there was the agricultural extension who just happened to be developing low oil corn. And they were like, "You're the first person that's ever asked to use this," so this process of craft brewers seeking out and finding ingredients, but also reconnecting with that agricultural history that is local, but also shared and bigger in the face of this larger kind of industrial agricultural economy, is really a beautiful one.
Is there anything known about whether some of these varieties were used for lambic brewing before?
Actually, in terms of raw wheat, so the little redhead from Brabant, the Kleine Rosse van Brabant, I don't know if that's the good translation, was the one that was used by the lambic brewers, and which was actually perfect for the soil, which is, I don't know what the English term is, it's clay-alike, leemgrond. Which actually goes back also to the whole history of Brabant, the dukedom of Brabant, which span from the south of Holland to the north of France, and you actually have like a kind of artery throughout that part that is the clay-alike ground, the leemgrond, that was made or that was perfect.
Loamy soil.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. That was perfect for wheat, and that's how a lot of beer styles that are still existing today, they refer back to actually the usage of a certain proportion of wheat. We're talking about the wheat beers, roughly on the right of Brussels. You have the lambic beers southwest of Brussels, Pajottenland and the Valley of the Seine. And Saison, which goes to the Ardennes, to the south of Belgium. So
you can track beer styles based on where they could grow wheat through these kinds of regions.
Even more so before, and that's also the history. Brewing was actually the winter activity of a farm. There are still old documents describing economic models where a farm had to use X% of a certain proportion of wheat in the mash so that they protected their own economy, which then was also impacting taxes and whatever in a kind of in the dukedom. So yeah, it's everything relates to what happened, what was the standard before. So and going back is, I think it's not an option. I think it's the only option.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, but first, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brewhouse to the integrated hop backs on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brewhouses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented, working with world-renowned brewing industry veterans, and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, are you involved in your local homebrew club? Want to receive even more benefits? Sign up today for 5-Star Chemicals Homebrew Club program. It's free, and you can have the chance to test out new products before they hit the market, receive exclusive swag, and enjoy discounts on brewing cleaners and sanitizers. Head on over to their website to sign up. You don't want to miss it.
Where we're sitting here in the barrel room, wish you could all be here with us, obviously. There's besides these really cool black sherry casks, and maybe we should hear more about what's going on in there too. later, but there's some really interesting markings and words on some of these barrels. I see Kleine Rose over there, maybe Van Limburg. Okay, and then there's some other words that I don't know. Are these are different varieties of grain that have gone into the lambic and then into the barrel, and so these are all going to be lambics made from different grains, and then later you can compare and what's going on in here.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we were explaining. We test the different wheat varieties and barley varieties first on the field to see are their agronomic traits good enough to grow in our region. If they're not, then we kind of delete them.
Right.
If they do pass the test of 5 years, then we brew with it. And we try to first brew 100% with one variety and not mix them up. We could later mix them up if you want, but it's very interesting for us to see, okay, the Witte van Vlaanderen, for example, which is a very old landrace from this region, compared to, you have the white landraces and the red landraces. That's kind of two big categories. And to see how do they involve in the beer. And so we have actually a very interesting project going on here with the barrels behind me, where there's a PhD student looking on how do these lambics evolve. So how does the yeast and the bacteria inside, are they different or do they behave different somehow between these three beers? And so the only parameter which changes is the wheat. So we have 60% of barley, of malt. This is the same barley. And then we have 40% of wheat. And so we have one red old landrace variety, one white landrace, and then one just regular modern wheat to compare with. And these results are extremely interesting because there's really differences.
So the barley or the wheat variety could impact the microbial development of the beer itself.
Exactly.
Because additionally, we're also talking about organic cereals. So on the cereal itself or on the grains itself, there's already a life existing, and that can really change from one type to the other, or one variety or landrace to the other, and that's also part of the study, because and it's not only about the air. There's already a lot of material existing on the ingredients. Look at natural wine. It's the same thing. There's already yeast and living material on the grape itself, on the grape skin. That is used in the whole fermentation.
This is fascinating to me, to think about. And obviously, these projects are still in barrels right now. You don't have finished things to taste, but I imagine there's been some work done. How... from what you all have seen so far, and we don't have all of the rundowns of reports in front of us to discuss it in all the particulars, but are there some broader ways that you have seen that the different wheat varieties impact the microbial development within those barrels?
Even there, everything depends on the size of the barrels, the shape of the barrels, and again, we don't go for one type of barrel. We have barrels starting from 400 liters, even 250, a few ones, up to the biggest fooder that we have is 8,000 liters, and everything in between. So there will always be a very big unknown factor as well. But again, it's the beauty of what lambic is. We don't interfere. We don't want to interfere. We don't add stuff. We don't get stuff out of it. And that's why the blending is the actual art. It's to taste, to taste all the lambics and to do something with it and try to find a balance that is proper to the characteristics that you want to get into it. And with Drie Fonteinen, passing from one generation to the other, you cannot learn it from a book. You have to adhere the process, but also the nose for lambics and the combination of different types of lambics. What we hope for, of course, and that's the question that we often get is, do you think that the different wheat and barley varieties will have a different taste? Honestly, we cannot answer to that yet. But if we can have at least the same taste with local cereals, with organically grown cereals, with people that we can support directly, that can learn from us as well, that we have a sustainable model, then I think we already managed to reach our ambition. have reached our ambition. Absolutely.
Obviously, this isn't a process that anyone would want to rush, but when do you think it would be possible for somebody to finally have a bottle in their hands of the Fonteinen Oude Geuze that were made with these landrace grain varieties?
So from about 2 years ago, I think on average, and I speak weighted average in a blend of Cuvée Armand and Gaston, there will already be 25 to, let's say, 40% of locally grown cereals. Not necessarily organic, because officially we are an organic brewery since February of last year, so more or less a year now. The first full Pajottenland grown Gueuze will be for next year to, let's say, 2023, and then fully organic, like officially certified organic, because we have started with the ambition of going full organic, but officially organic, that will be for 24, 25, the earliest, something like that. Yeah.
You know, I think there's a question here, and you bring it up when we talk about kind of, barrel and size and scale. And you mentioned earlier this major project to move from the original brewery into this new location, especially as a lambic brewery, moving and changing location and dealing with that kind of process is a major ordeal and has the ability to change flavor and impact. Talk to me about some of that process of moving and how you all prepared this brewery to make beer that achieved the same flavor that you all wanted to from the original brewery.
Actually, and that's where COVID also changed the plans a bit. Currently, we're still brewing at the brewery in the village center of Beersel. During COVID, so 2020 hit, lockdown, we were about to start the practical side of the addition of a new building to this building, but obviously we stopped the whole process.
Sure.
And we started to rethink the whole future a bit. Having hit the ceiling at the 8,000 hectoliters in the barrel room, having a full warm room with no sales at that moment, we had to rebalance everything. At the same time, our American importer went into bankruptcy, so that was an additional on top of COVID. That was an additional impact, but also, and that's a bit the emotional side to things. End of 2018, Armand was diagnosed with cancer. That he, on the moment that he actually started to enjoy retirement, he got a very bad news. He coped with it well, fairly well, up to the summer of 2019, where the impact of the medication was so big that his body just said stop, and he was hospitalized because of sheer fatigue. He's doing well now, but obviously it has had an impact on the way or adjusting his life to his new situation. If he could, he would be here any day or every day. But that also made us reflect on where do we want to go. He was the biggest sponsor of the Future project, also in times of doubt, especially trying to balance everything financially. He said that we had to go to continue with it. But yeah, last summer, 2021, we put everything together again. We start to puzzle again. So, and for the future of Drie Fonteinen, we decided to actually keep this level of production, but to continue with the building of the logistical building or construction of the logistical building, a new lambic and the brew house, but only continue with installing a new brewery when it's financially possible. That way we can, keeping this volume in the barrel room, we are creating more options in terms of surface to put away even more special barrels, like the sherry barrels, for example, or install a whole Solera system, which takes even more time than than the 2 years and a half to get a certain result. So we rebalanced everything also with the banks and financing, and we think that if we can go back to the 2019 volumes of sales, which was about 3,200 hectoliters, we should be able to pay actually the lease of the building and continue with the current team. That's also very important, and that's the human aspect. We have learned that the balance in a team, especially in lambic brewing, we have quite a young team. There's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of creativity, but that's also a side that we want to or a value that we want to secure, that everybody can actually do what he or she likes to do, that we can still be creative. Also, and then coming to the sherry barrels, like do some trips to go to the bodegas themselves without having to work with a middleman, but really invest that time into looking for quality, into going to natural winemakers to pick the grapes ourselves. Those are actually the values that we want to continue with, rather than doing a next step in volume. And that's actually the biggest change since the very first plans that we drafted in 2018.
There's an interesting dynamic here where you are at the same time paying respect to this tradition, but also trying to use all the tools at your disposal to do it better and to understand more. Certain things like cleaning your barrels, using better technology to steam clean barrels, using, that kind of microbial, paneling to discover what's going on at any phase of that fermentation, so that you can just know, how things are steering in these directions. Talk to me a little bit, about that approach, that, moving, beyond just we think this is kind of that, happening here, and to taking it more. And this is something I think that's happened over the last 20 years especially within lambic, to, whether it's processes for adding fruit or trying to, decrease oxygen in the beer itself, so that, you don't end up with more, acetic production or all of those pieces, using this kind of technological approach to make something that tastes that realizes that flavor vision of lambic.
Just to point out, we don't use a lot of technology to actually come to certain results. What we do use in cleaning the barrels is actually indeed high pressurized steam, because history has shown that is really a very effective way to clean barrels.
But making sure that it is truly spontaneous fermentation rather than a barrel-driven. Yeah. That's important to you.
Yeah, and that's also learnings from the past. When everything was done by hand or with the chains, there were always risks to miss a spot, but it was that spot that could infect the whole barrel and make it vinegar rather than lambic. And still today, you cannot rule out everything. Even a few months ago, we threw away, or we dumped 4 beautiful barrels of 4-year-old lambic. That beautiful barrels, but the lambic turned into vinegar, and then you have to make the choices. And those choices today we can cope with it financially. We don't suffer from it anymore, and those are the small anecdotes from Armand. He said, like, back in the days when I didn't have the financial means and I had some acidic sting in my lambics, sometimes I just blended them. They gave the most beautiful vintage Gueuzes, but I had no financial options just to dump it, which we obviously do have today. Rather, also in terms of techniques, just to give an example, there's one thing that we did change for the better. That was based on academic research done by Jonas, who is also meanwhile working here, and which was also something that we discussed about internally. It was the how do you call it? The pre-acidification on the cool ship. So acidifying the wort to decrease the risk of enterobacteria already inoculating at the beginning of the fermentation process. It's something that historically has always been done. Back in the days, they actually poured a bucket of very sour lambic onto the cruise ship to get the actual pH down.
Right.
Jonas, a few years ago in his PhD, he actually showed that the pre-acidification of wort has no influence or has very little influence on the working of the enterobacteria at the beginning of your fermentation. During these studies, we had a lot of talks with him, and he said, like, I'm convinced that it will not impact the lambic. And then we just discussed, okay, are we going to stop it or not? Because that's the only thing, it's the only addition that we cannot say it's fully natural. And we decided to stop from one day to the next. And it has had no impact on...
and so you no longer pre-acidify before the cool ship?
I think 4 years now.
Wow.
We stopped 4 years ago, 2022, 2018, even 2017, I think, almost 5 years ago. We stopped pre-acidifying. And that was a point that Armand was not convinced of. But in the end, he said, like, look, guys, I really trust you. And what Lukas also explained about the academic research that we do with the old wheat varieties, the only thing that we want to get out of it is to understand, not to steer the process, but to understand, to better understand. Truth be told, it's true. We will also use it, and today it's only limited to a few wheat varieties, but we will use the learnings from it to see what type of wheat variety would be better developing in the beer than maybe another. And that's why we chose a white variety and a red variety to see if there's like really big differences. For the rest, you will not find a lab at Fonteinen. The only machine, the only machine that we have is actually an alcohol analyzer to put the alcohol percentage on our labels. We don't have a microscope. We don't. The only thing we look at in a blend is the number of Play-Dohs to see that we actually still have enough residual sugars for the continued fermentation in the bottle. And that's about it. I can open all doors at the brewery in the barrel room. Yeah. We don't have a microscope or nothing. We don't measure. It's the nose and the taste. And to be honest, sometimes you're also wrong. Bottles not re-fermenting or fermenting or flavor that is not up to what we expect or what we see as a Fonteinen character. And then we put them away to see how they evolve in the bottle, and that's a choice.
Sure. Let's get back to the question that Joe had. Some of the more you all are at the same time pushing towards different ways of finishing, finding other ways of adding interesting and creative flavor to the beers that you make. Not to depart from tradition, but to embrace that in many ways. You've always received barrels from a wide number of places. You have some here from Pilsner or Kel, and then of course we've got sherry barrels on the other side. It's a pretty fantastic spot to be sitting between these right now. But talk to me about some of the more creative expressions that you all have engaged in, and how you all have built some ideas around adding to that flavor lexicon that within lambic.
It's also an interesting topic to talk to, and a lot of anecdotes and stories that we can put up against. When we just moved to this building, and one of the very first things that we did is actually start to structurally work together with barrel makers, with coopers. At that time, it was really difficult as a lambic brewery, being dependent on wood, because the fermentation, the maturation only happens in wood at Fonteinen, together with the traditional other traditional lambic breweries as well, of course. was to get barrels. So we worked with middlemen, but it was harder and harder to get like high quality barrels. That is where we sent Armand, being the pater familias, to some of the Italian family cooperages to talk to the pater familias of those cooperages with an Italian translator. And it was a full week. We continued to work here. But those guys understood what we were doing. And the months after, we got one phone call after the other asking us what we actually needed. So we turned around quite a bad situation into something positive. That was one big step in trying to structure what we were doing and to be a bit more proactive. And then you start to grow your team. You get a lot of young people. One of the ideas was to start to try with other fruits. According to the same principles of natural maceration, we don't punch down the fruit, we don't puree it, we don't make juice out of it or nothing. It's full fruit that we put on the lambic. But of course, you can do more macerations than kriek and framboise. Armand, and that's the inspiring teacher that he is, he will always say what he thinks. But in the end, he only hopes that he would have inspired people. But he lets you decide to do something with the inspiration or not. So he gave his thoughts. He said, like, been there, done that. I have tried a lot of things. I will not stop you to try, but I'm just telling you what my experience is. Our reply at that point was like, Armand, let us try as well. If we hit a wall, we hit the wall, but at least we have learned something. He said, okay, do it. Of course, we try in very small barrels, 500-liter barrels. We tried with peaches for the first time, so with a wide range of fruits. It was also the first time that we did something on such a small scale. And that's the reason why we called the series The Twist of Fate, Speling van het Lot. And the very first series with a numerous variety of different fruits was called Crazy Kids. And that was his response to what we were doing. He says, like, you're all crazy kids. Ja, dat is allemaal zotte kadeeën. But in our head, it was perfect because we were his kids. He has always seen the team as his children. And the very first example is a beautiful one. We ordered with Garbelotto 1,000-liter barrel that was toasted to put sour cherries on. We actually forgot about it because it was such a small project, and it macerated for 9 months. And Armand was actually upset because a new barrel that was toasted was about threefold or triple the price of any other type of barrel per liter. And he was upset because we were still counting the dimes for every investment that we made. The moment that we tasted from the barrel the fruit lambic that came off, he turned away because he actually shed a tear. He says, like, guys, if this is the result, you just continue whatever I'm saying. And this is Armand. And so it has evolved. We are still doing a lot of different stuff. But the values that we are doing it with are all inspired by Armand. So the very first wide variety of fruit macerations was actually with fruit that we got from our typical supplier of also the bulk sour cherries. But it has evolved now to one-on-one sourcing with organic fruit farmers on every type of fruit. It has evolved to setting up a network of private owners of Schaerbeekse sour cherries, of families. We now have 200 families in the whole of Belgium that has sour Schaerbeekse cherry trees. We have also multiplied sour Schaerbeekse cherry trees actually from the root shoot rather than having it grafted on another tree. And those are all those are again, Driefontein is driven by values of its ancestors, of its predecessors, and for us, for our generation, it is Armand. And the last type of approach is then the barrels. So the sherry barrel program, also known as the Seni Frontiera. It's an idea of Armand together with Andy de Brouwer, which is a chef of a nice restaurant in the, close to brewery in Halle, Les Éleveurs. Those barrels came also in through a third party, but that has also evolved to going really to the bodegas, to the families behind, talking to them, selecting the barrels, and having them shipped over. So they are emptied at the bodega, and 2 days later they're here, and we put lambic on it. And that's also part of what we want to do, is also tell the story about sherry. The first time we launched the Seni Frontiera, or no, it was the third time, we actually also sold a few bottles of sherry next to it, and also tell the story. And what we have seen is that people, and especially I think in the mind of a craft beer consumer, they don't want to, or even a craft beer consumer, but also a lambic aficionado. It's not only about a beer, it's about the values behind. And what we have seen is that a subset of the people who bought the Seni Frontiera and the sherry with it, they actually looked into the culture of real traditional sherry. And it's also a culture, I often say that the culture of sherry is now at the point that lambic was mid-90s. There's no local interest anymore. There's only a few big players taking or eating up all the small ones. But those that are left that continue with the same stubbornness and steadfast vision for the future, if you can go there and you can drink it straight from the barrel, it's one of the most beautiful experiences in a lifetime. And that's what we, again, our future for the, or our vision for the future is that we can also share that with a whole team of people, passionate people. And maybe one day also we want to communicate about it and really let people see what is behind a certain craft in a very open way, actually.
I love that you're connecting in that way with other like-minded beverage makers, across different disciplines and genres of beverage, but who embrace a similar kind of philosophy for what they do. That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're getting on in time now. As we kind of wrap up, what does the big picture look like? I mean, I know we've defined a few things. You want to maintain the production where you are, and you are simply trying to, develop some of these creative ideas. But what's the near-term goal, and what is the biggest long-term goal?
The near term is to continue what we like to do. And hopefully that the market will get back to 2019 level pre-COVID.
Right.
Nobody has the answer, I think. But the very long run is that we see the definite return to a local economy, from grain to Gueuze or to bottle. And that we're not the only one that is doing that, because what we're doing, and then coming back a bit to the whole cereal collective, we're currently one of the only ones to do it end to end. And we didn't even talk about the hops, because that's another local project. But one of the traits as well with the farmers, if I can take a few steps back, is that we're actually alleviating a part of their risk as well. So and that's the uniqueness of the model. We are paying on the moment that they are actually sowing the seeds. We already pay for the number or the surface that they are sowing into. If there's no crop, at least they have something of financial means to survive the summer. And then after the harvest, we pay per ton or per unit of cereals. That's quite unique. And we hope that this model gets more exposure to other brewers, because I do think that if you can scale it, and that will not be for us, but there are some farmers that could scale, if you can scale it consistently, that even for bigger craft brewers, that they can actually make a calculation that actually fits the value of it, and that they can calculate it into the beer.
We see that in some more commonly in hops, with brewers, say, sponsoring an acre. Same kind of thing of an experimental hop and saying, hey, we're going to cover this and it may not work out, and agronomically we might get wiped out, but we're going to take the risk from the farmer in order to pursue this. But that's a beautiful piece, and it's something that is possible within this world of craft because there's an economy, a price point, and everything else that allows the brewers through the consumers that are willing to pay for that. When people often ask, like, why is this so much more expensive than some other beer? Because beer should just be cheap. This is the answer. The answer is that in order to have something like this that protects everyone through that entire chain of that production, from agriculture through brewing into distribution and getting there, this is part of it. And so I think, but from a consumer perspective, it's something that I'm willing to do as a consumer, to pay a little bit more, knowing that everyone along that process, is paid in a sustainable way that can live the lives that they want to and express that and be made whole through it.
It also tastes pretty good.
It does taste pretty good.
It's all right. You can drink it.
Yeah. Well, Werner and Lukas, I appreciate you all talking with us on this episode of the podcast. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. BSG offers the largest variety of quality ingredients to create outstanding beers. Think outside the puree box with Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends. Get detailed insight into your fermentations with Brew Monitor risk-free. Put SS BrewTech's advances to work in your brew house and sign up today for 5-Star Chemicals Homebrew Club program. Of course, if you enjoy the podcast, we'd love your support. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. We'd love to keep doing this and keep bringing great episodes like this to you. And of course, we also continue to bring you this great content through the magazine, video classes, and everything else. So, Werner, if people want to learn more about your brewery, where do they find you all?
Our website is still in full construction, but we do have a separate website for the Cereal Collective project. You can find it on granen.3fonteinen.be. It's spelled granen.3fonteinen.be.
Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you about this. Again, like I said at the top, we didn't come in expecting to focus so much with a lambic brewery about grain, but it's been interesting and inspiring to hear just how closely you all are tying those things. Thanks again for joining me. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.